Thanks for listening to the Career Planning Show. You can listen to a new episode every Monday on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or any other platform where podcasts are shared. If you'd like to ask me a question, you can submit it via email at alex@rascanu.com. I'm Alex Rascanu, and I'm coming to you from the Staples Studio in Midtown, Toronto, Canada. You are joining a conversation about who you are, what work you were born to do, where you can do it, and how to get there. Today we have the pleasure of discussing career planning with Sandford Borins, Professor Emeritus of Strategic Management at the University of Toronto, the best internationally ranked Canadian university. Professor Borins holds a BA from Harvard University, a Master of Public Policy from the Kennedy School at Harvard University, and a PhD in Economics from Harvard University. He recently retired from the University of Toronto after a 45-year academic career, but continues to be engaged in research, writing, and giving professional presentations. With his wife and co-author, Beth Hurst, he is currently writing a book on narrative and politics. Learn more about Professor Borins at sandfordborins.com. Professor, how did you come to realize that you would want to become a university professor one day?
Well, put it this way. I wasn't sure. When I was doing a master's in public policy, I sort of contemplated working in the public service. I contemplated politics, and I contemplated academics. I went on in my career to work on a PhD. Even at that point, I was not sure. I started a position at a university before I finished my PhD, and then I decided that of the three, I liked university teaching the most. I felt that working for the public service was rather constraining in the sense that public servants are often, are not allowed to express their own opinions. They're simply there to serve politicians. And I found that much too intellectually constraining. And then on the other hand, I sort of had a little taste of politics. I worked for one of the candidates for the leadership of the Conservative Party in 1976, Joe Clark, who indeed became the leader. And working on a leadership convention gave me a taste of politics, and I felt that that was in a way too hectic and too demanding. And so then I sort of eliminated politics in the public service and chose academics. I found that I liked teaching and that I also liked doing research. So it was a career that fit my personality.
And just delving a little bit deeper into that part of your story, would you say that Joe Clark or someone else on the campaign had some sort of an impact that influenced your decision to specialize in the area of public management in terms of your academic research and teaching? Or were there other events or individuals that had an influence in you deciding to pursue that particular path?
Yeah, well, I was always interested in the public sector. And, but that could have led me to political science. I did my doctorate in economics. I wasn't necessarily committed to becoming an economist, yes, but I liked sort of the rigor and the quantitative and the use of quantitative methodologies that characterize economics. And so I felt that economics was good preparation. I did two studies fairly early on that I think helped define my career,
Hmm.
or define my intellectual interests. I did a doctoral dissertation about transportation planning, in particular, the planning of airports.
Hmm.
And that was uh, that was a response to a government policy, or a government decision to build a second airport for Toronto.
Hmm.
And the more I looked at that, the more I realized that that was a bad decision, a bad policy, in the sense that the government was adding capacity to the transportation system before the capacity at the existing airport was completely utilized.
Yes.
And, as you know, it turned out that the federal government never built a second airport in Toronto. Pearson is, was capable of handling something like 3 or 4 times the level of traffic that the government thought it was capable of handling in the early 70s.
Hmm.
So that was, that study certainly influenced me in the direction of sort of policy analysis and public policy.
Hmm.
Then there was a second study that I did, a little bit related to the first. It was about the conflict over bilingual air traffic control. And I don't, I'm sure your listeners, don't know about this, or may not have heard about it. But in the mid 70s, there was a very fierce conflict about which languages were to be used in communication between air traffic controllers and pilots. And pilots and controllers in Quebec wanted to be able to speak French. And they met with some opposition from their English-speaking colleagues, who said it was important that all pilots and all controllers be able to understand one another. It turned out that technically the English-speaking pilots and controllers were wrong. It became a very political issue because it was seen as an instance of sort of Francophone Quebecers demanding the right to use their own language in the province of Quebec. And, this was the point at which Quebec had a separatist government. And, it became sort of an important aspect of the whole issue of separatism in Quebec. And I did a study of this particular conflict. And doing this study influenced me to want to do more studies of of public policy. And so I moved away from sort of the more technical transportation economics that I sort of did in my thesis, to more of a sort of a historical approach to studying public policy. And by historical, I don't mean ancient history. I mean, in a sense, current history.
Yes. Yes. Thank you for sharing. And so if we go a little bit deeper into that even further, so if we look at the fact that you've worked for over 45 years in academic research, and you did specialize in public sector innovation and management narratives, what would you say have been some of the key findings that you've been able to identify, that you've been able to leverage, and that were perhaps utilized in decision-making processes within the various levels of government?
Okay, it's, put it this way, it's hard to know the extent to which your research is adopted by practitioners. It's easier to know the extent to which your research is used by other academics, because you can, there are websites out there that count sort of academic citations.
Like Google Scholar.
Yeah, Google Scholar, for instance. So you can see your impact on other scholars pretty clearly through Google Scholars. Okay, I mean, that said, in the area of public sector innovation, my research was based on applications to innovation awards. And the research was quantitative in the sense that I looked at large numbers of applications and was able to do statistical analysis. So I could see the things that characterized successful public sector innovations. And I had a number of findings that were replicated both. I mean, I originally started with data from the US, but the findings were also typified data from other countries such as Europe and Australia. Anyway, some of these findings involved the existence of local heroes. Many public sector innovations were initiated by frontline workers and middle managers. They didn't all come from politicians and senior public servants. Mm-hmm. So there were these local heroes out there who were coming up with ideas and finding ways to convince their superiors to accept and adopt these ideas. Mm-hmm. And that was one important finding. A second important finding was that public sector innovations very frequently, more often than not, involved interorganizational cooperation. Mm-hmm. So an innovation just doesn't happen within one organization, but it usually tends to involve different organizations working together. And you can sort of think of innovations as creative responses to difficult problems that aren't simply contained within the responsibilities of one organization. They cross organizational boundaries, and innovation is the response to these types of problems. A third important finding is that evaluation is important. Innovations that were evaluated and proved that they were delivering results were the ones most likely to get attention from the media, to win public sector innovation awards, and most importantly, to be replicated. So people in the public sector wanted to know that innovations worked before they replicated them. Yeah. So these are sort of three very important findings from my work. In terms of impact on practitioners, I'd say this, that I started studying public sector innovation in the 1990s. Yes. And there were people out there, academics and practitioners, who thought that I was crazy, that I was studying something that didn't exist. Okay. Sort of public sector innovation is an oxymoron. The public sector is by definition never innovative. In any event, I and some others were studying public sector innovation. It was not a large field then. However, within the last 10 or 20 years, there have been more academics studying public sector innovation and more practitioners interested in public sector innovation. As an example of this, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development has established a unit, a branch that deals with public sector innovation, and they've developed what they call an observatory of public sector innovation. It's on the OECD website, and what they've built a database of hundreds of public sector innovations all over the world. So there are a lot more academics and practitioners interested in public sector innovation now than was the case when I started 20 years ago. And so I feel, apart from my Google Scholar count, which is considerable, some of my articles on public sector innovation have been cited 400 and 500 times, and that feels good. Yeah. But the other thing is that my work and the work of a few others who started early on has had an influence in developing this field that is of interest both to other academics and to practitioners. And that's good.
Thank you.
Let's chat a little bit about management narratives. Management
Yeah.
narratives is the area that you've been focusing on for the last number of years.
Yeah.
Would you mind sharing a little bit about what have been some of your findings, some of the learnings that you've taken away from taking a look at this particular topic?
Okay. Yeah. I guess I would suggest two here. One is that many people understand politics and history in terms of what they've seen in the movies.
Yeah.
Um, and this is sometimes bad because what they see in the movies is a poor representation or sometimes even a misrepresentation of
Mhm.
history. Okay. But, many people's understanding of sort of two figures I can think of, Churchill and Lincoln, is based on what they've seen of Churchill and Lincoln in the movies.
Mm.
And as I said, I mean, it's nice that people remember Churchill and Lincoln because I think, they were hugely important figures historically. But it's unfortunate that many people have a misunderstanding of Churchill and Lincoln based on the sorts of stories that movies have tried to tell.
Yes, they've been dramatizing the characters, showcasing certain aspects of who they
Yeah,
are, and coming up with other aspects who, perhaps they didn't really perform things that were, not
yeah,
within their character, perhaps.
yeah. I mean, I think the sort of the craziest of, just as an example, the craziest of these is in a movie called Darkest Hour,
Hmm.
which was
Rather recent.
yeah, I think it released in 2017. And indeed, Gary Oldman, the actor who played Churchill, won the Academy Award for Best Actor. The movie had a totally nonsensical scene about how Churchill, you know, on one occasion went on the tube, and he was asking sort of everyday citizens about what his policy should be vis-a-vis vis-a-vis World War II, and or in particular whether Britain should fight or whether it should try to make a peace agreement with the Nazis. In any event, this scene of government by focus group didn't happen, and
Hmm.
numerous commentators pointed out that it was crazy. It was a total misunderstanding of Churchill.
Hmm.
So that's one example.
They were
Um,
probably just trying to relate to the audience and put the audience in his shoes or something to that effect to see, how they would feel in that particular situation. But yeah, so much, unfortunately, so much untruth sometimes occurs and influences
yeah,
people's point of
yeah,
view.
yeah. I guess another thing I would say in sort of narrative and politics is that um, certainly for people for everybody, it's important to have a compelling personal story.
Hmm.
You are, and to a great extent, you are the story you tell about yourself.
Hmm.
And it's important to have a story that is clear, that is relatable, and that other people can identify with and make sense of. And I
Yes.
think that having a clear, relatable personal story is a good thing in terms of a cover letter, a job interview,
Hmm.
and a first date.
Yes.
Okay, I'll leave it at that.
And speaking of that, one something that's part of my personal story is the way you've impacted me, in that out of all the professors I had at University of Toronto, you were the most engaging professor by far. And I so love the public management class that I took in my third academic year that I ended up specializing in public management during my undergrad. I ended up taking serving as a research assistant. And ended up working with a member of parliament right after my undergraduate degree. Went off into the corporate world for some time, but then just realized that it's not for me, and went back and pursued the master in public administration, and then worked with the provincial government. And I'm still, to some extent, in the public management realm based on the work that I'm doing currently. So you've profoundly impacted me personally, and I'm really thankful for that. I wonder if you might be able
I'm
to
delighted to hear that.
Yes, I really appreciate it. And one thing that really stood out to me was the way in which you engaged with the students, the way you set up the class environment, the way you even did an exercise where you had us make budgetary decisions as the sitting government, and having one person be the premier, another person be the minister of finance, and then you had other ministers representing the various departments, and then pitching for funding based on a pot of money, and then the minister of finance having to speak with the president of the treasury board to make budgetary allocations, and then have to explain that to the ministers. That was a really fascinating exercise, very engaging. Would you mind speaking a little bit about your teaching methodology and how you arrived at such an engaging way of teaching students?
Okay, well, I guess I've preferred to teach sort of senior undergraduates and to have small classes. The classes with senior undergraduates tend to be smaller. I've just felt that lecturing isn't the right way to teach people of that age, that they have ideas, they have experience, and I want them to share their ideas and their experience with their colleagues. And I don't want it simply to be me lecturing. Yes, parts of the course involve me lecturing, but I want to create opportunities for students to engage with one another. And that's how I've sort of gravitated towards that teaching methodology. Sometimes it's referred to as being a guide on the side rather than a sage on the stage. So I've particularly preferred that. And then there's a Confucian saying, I think, I hear and I forget, and then I hear and I forget, but I do and I remember. So I much prefer sort of the latter form of teaching that involves engagement.
That's right. And the last portion of that phrase is I do and I understand.
Right.
So you really got us to actually be part of the story, which was great.
Right. Thank you for refreshing my memory. I guess the other thing I would say is that I hope that the world can return to that the world can return to the pre-COVID days, in the sense of people being able to engage with one another in person. I think it's hard to do this type of teaching when it's mediated through Zoom. I know that Zoom has breakout rooms and all that, but there's a lot more that we gain and that we learn when we're sort of interacting with one another, and we can see, each other's entire bodies, as opposed to simply seeing faces in a screen.
Yeah. Here. One final question. Let's imagine that we're talking right now with a student. They're perhaps pursuing an undergraduate, a master's, or a PhD degree, and they're really pursuing the career opportunity of becoming a professor. Someone in their life inspired them to become a professor. They've been seeing some of their professors, how engaging they are, and some of the interesting academic work that they're doing. And they're on the pathway to become a university professor. We are in a rather difficult economic climate, and it does seem as though universities are finding it harder to hire new professors. And that poses a significant challenge to anyone who would want to become a professor. There already aren't that many postings that come up every year. And now, from what I'm seeing, it appears that there will be even more job postings in the field. Are there any thoughts that you have on how someone who's thinking about such a career trajectory, especially if they don't just simply want to be a lecturer, they would want to be a full-time, researcher, like academic, to teach and also to conduct research on a full-time basis? Do you have any career development thoughts on this?
Well, I know. I agree with you. I mean, this is a big problem. When I was starting out in the 70s, academic jobs were plentiful. And that is not the case now. I guess my advice to someone would be have a plan B. In other words, yes, work on a PhD. I think, because that's what you need to get an academic job. Yeah. And, the discipline of doing a doctoral thesis, which is in effect writing a book, is, from an intellectual point of view, is valuable. And in a sense, the skills you gain from that will never be taken away from you.
Yes.
But it's important to have a plan B, to think about other possible careers that you could go to if an academic position at a university doesn't work out. And, I guess what I would say is that one thing that didn't exist in the 70s was sort of the technology sector in any way comparable to the technology sector now, right? I mean, IBM was there, but, even Microsoft and Apple were just getting started in the 70s. And, the big technology firms have created thousands and millions of jobs, many of them at high level. And, firms like Apple and Google do hire PhDs.
That's right.
And so that's, in a way, an alternative career path.
That's right. And the public sector does as well. There are certainly fields that someone can pivot to if an academic career does not pan out on a full-time basis.
Sure. And then, similarly, someone, could, with a PhD, could start in one of the other fields, but keep their eye open on the academic world. And if the right academic job becomes available, they could pivot to that.
That's right. That's a really good thought to end on. Really appreciate having you on the Career Planning Show. Thank you.
It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for listening to the Career Planning Show. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to the show and share it with a friend. For more episodes, you can find the Career Planning Show on demand wherever you listen to podcasts. You can also find me on the main social media platforms by following @ALEXRASCANU.